This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Getting the show started is Allison Womack and Heidi Lange, Kansas Farm Service Agency Agriculture Program Specialist, to talk about upcoming deadlines and programs that producers might want to keep in mind because of the heat. Director of the Land Use Survey Office at K-State, Leah Tsoodle, continues today's show discussing the results from the 2024 Kansas Custom Rates Survey. The show wraps up with K-State's Brad White, Phillip Lancaster, Bob Larson, and Joe Gerken with another segment from the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast as they answer listener questions about calf water consumption and if producers should supply a separate source for their younger cattle. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show talking to people from the Farm Service Agency. And today we're joined by Allison Womack and Heidi Lange, who are both Agriculture Program Specialists at the Kansas Farm Service Agency. Allison, Heidi, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Allison, starting off with a reminder about acreage reporting.
The annual deadline is July 15th. Make sure you're reporting all your spring planted crops, all your grass acreages, what you're haying and grazing, any farm changes that you've had, operation changes, owner changes, all that good stuff. In addition to acreage reporting on July 15th, any ARC IC, if you participate in that program, you're going to want to turn in your 2023 yields at that time.
And another program with a deadline, however, this one is quite a ways out, the marketing assistance loans.
Sure. As we're looking at wheat harvest right now, producers are probably paying attention to prices. If you want to hold on to that grain and maybe get an interim short-term finance loan, contact your county office. Marketing assistance loans are good for 9 months. You have till March 31st, 2025 to get a loan on that wheat. The interest rate right now is 6.125, so you'll get a better rate coming to us than your local bank.
Why might a producer want to use that program?
He's going to maintain control of that grain, and he's going to get a low interest rate at our level.
In a program we've mentioned a few times, but wanting to put out a reminder about Grassland CRP.
Grassland CRP sign-up is going on right now. You only got till Friday, June 28th to get into your county office and get signed up for that. Grassland CRP is able to be grazed or hayed. It's a little bit more flexible than the regular general sign-up.
Heidi, you mentioned general CRP, and that enrollment has recently come to an end. And what are some stats from that?
So right now, if you haven't heard from your county office, if you signed up in your general CRP program, and if you haven't heard from your county office, you sure need to get a hold of them for that. They should be sending out letters for the accepted and rejected offers. 93% of acres got back into or newly signed up into the program at an average of $63 an acre. So that is a good stat to have for the United States.
When might general CRP come back up?
All contracts expire on September 30th of every year. Usually we hear about those due signups early spring, February, March, somewhere around there. So if you have something that is expiring on September 30th, sure keep your eyes out for that news release in early spring.
And something a lot of Kansas producers are currently feeling, along with their livestock, is it's really hot outside. And is there a program that maybe producers want to keep an eye on?
So the Livestock Indemnity Program is for livestock deaths. So it's not just cattle, but any kind of livestock due to heat or any kind of natural extreme weather. So to keep track of that is to keep good inventory, keep track of livestock deaths, keep track of the day they died, and bring those totals into your county office and let them know within 30 days of that livestock death.
How do they document that?
You can just use a spreadsheet from your computer. You can get with your vet, work with your veterinarians out there in the field and have them write something up for you. But there's several different ways to do it, and the county office will be able to help you figure out what kind of verification that you need.
And when that comes to weather, is it really just heat or any type of severe weather that could happen?
It's any type of severe weather. It could be lightning, extreme cold. The humidity always plays a factor in everything. So it's just that window of humidity and temperature that will depend on whether those livestock are eligible. But yeah, lightning and tornado is also eligible.
Are producers able to use this program multiple times in a year? For instance, if one set of cattle maybe had issues right now and then at the end of July they lost more livestock to weather?
Yeah, they can, and they'll be grouped by different weight classes and different classifications, adults, yearlings, babies, any of that kind of nature. Just keep really good records of what classes of animals that you lose.
And as we're thinking about animal health and safety, H5N1, a recent announcement from the Farm Service Agency.
Sure. We don't have a specific dairy program for it. However, we have a program that's been announced. We don't know the details yet. It's going to be under the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program, ELAP. The first step producers need to take is go get a record from their veterinarian showing that they have a positive test for that particular virus, and hopefully more information will be forthcoming.
Heidi, Allison, is there a way that maybe people could come work with you in the future?
Sure. You can always find us on usajobs.gov. You can set up reminders, any search parameters, and you'll get an email anytime there's something in your local area.
And always wanting to put out a reminder that if producers want to find out more information from the Farm Service Agency, how can they do that?
Contact your local county office or always look at Farmers.gov.
Allison, Heidi, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
That was Agriculture Program Specialist with the Kansas Farm Service Agency, Allison Womack and Heidi Lange. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by Kansas Forest Service's Ariel Whiteley-Knoll and Kansas landowner and longtime woodland manager Tim Lyons on an episode of Kansas Forest Service's Kansas Canopy.
So excited to have you. So to start, let's talk a little bit about your property. Can you just walk us through what are your woodlands like? What's your property like here in Kansas?
Sure. I own 40 acres of old-growth timber and an additional 20 acres of native prairie grass in southwest Douglas County in the beautiful 8 Mile Creek Valley. This is an old-growth forest that has been around since before the settlement days and was mapped by the Kansas Natural Heritage and Inventory for the Kansas Biologic Survey recently that showed an overlay of the woodlands that existed in Douglas County back before 1856. And that's how old these woodlands are. It's a contiguous forested ecosystem that contains, probably about 40 landowners and extends through Douglas County into Franklin County and eventually flows into the Meridazine watershed. And it's characterized by old-growth timber, some magnificent trees, primarily oak and hickory. And it's home to all sorts of diverse wildlife that's very unique to a large forest ecosystem. So that's the wonderful place that I live in.
That is so cool. And I just think that, we don't have enough recognition. Obviously, we're a prairie state, and the prairie is a really critical endangered ecosystem in our state, but we're also a forest state. We have those areas of old growth forests. So how lucky are you?
I can't tell you how lucky I am. I'm thankful every day for the place I live in. And it never ceases to amaze me how beautiful this place is every day. And I've been there, I bought the place back in the early 90s. And, I don't want to over-romanticize it. It has ticks and copperheads and every thorn you can possibly think of. But it's magnificent. I'm very lucky and blessed to live a life like this in the middle of the woods like this.
That's fantastic. So I'm glad you mentioned when you purchased the property. What did the property look like when you first came to be its steward?
Well, it was wild and unmaintained. There was not even a good road that led to the property. It was a dirt farm track. There was no utilities, no electricity. There was an old trail that went diagonally through the North 40, which is all my timber, and that's about the only access there was. It was rough and rugged, and it needed a lot of silviculture application and forest stand improvement, definitely.
I can only imagine, buying a piece of property like that it would be really overwhelming knowing where to start when you're looking at managing even your different types of ecosystems. So what were some of those first steps, or what would you recommend to somebody who first wants to just get to know what in the world do you do with these woodlands, with this prairie?
Right, that's a good question. It depends on the landowner and what your personal goals are. And it's important, I think, to really define what those goals are. And also be flexible enough to understand that as you get older, your goals are going to change with the more that you learn. And that's it. That's the key is learning, because it is overwhelming. But if you have good goals set, you can approach it like anything else and, break it down into components and, go from there. But I definitely would also recommend getting help. And we're blessed in the state of Kansas that we have so many avenues for a forest landowner, to get help, and so many different resources. I was very lucky. The previous landowner, with the documents that he left for me, gave me a very old Kansas Forest Service stewardship plan. And I thought, what the heck is this? And I looked it over, and there was an inventory of the trees. There was talk about the plant life, the history of the place, and recommendations. And that's how I first discovered that there were services that could help a landowner like me, or anyone.
Once again, that was Kansas landowner and longtime woodland manager Tim Lyons and Kansas Forest Service's Errol Whiteley-Knoll. I will link their full podcast in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Wednesday show discussing the Kansas Custom Rates Survey of 2024. And to talk about it, we're joined by the Director of the Land Use Survey Office at K-State, Leah Tsoodle. Leah, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Shelby. I sure appreciate it.
What is this Kansas Custom Rates Survey?
So the Kansas Custom Rates Survey is... What we want to do with the report is we want to provide a data source for folks looking to hire custom work done, or for custom operators to compare what their rates are to what others are across the state. We survey lots of different individuals across the state and arrive at averages. So these are not any one person's rates. These are averages for the areas, for the state, and it just kind of provides a benchmark for folks if they're negotiating rates or if operators are setting their rates. So that's what we want to do with the custom rates report.
How often does this combination of the survey and report come out?
We conduct a survey once every 2 years. The report comes out as soon as we have time to clean, sort, and analyze the data.
Before we hop in talking about some of the numbers with this report, wanting to mention some of the prices that are included and not included as we talk about them.
So the prices in this report include the charges for machinery, power, fuel, and the operator. The prices do not include the costs of chemicals, seeds, and other materials, unless the report specifically specifies that those costs are included. The one exception is hay baling materials. So make sure and note that, for example, for application, that does not include the costs of the chemicals for application. It's the cost of application only.
And Leah, hopping into this report and talking about what some of the numbers are that you guys have concluded from the survey, first wanting to mention harvesting.
So we saw increases in 2022, but we also saw increases again in 2024. Now, the biggest increase in 2024 was in sorghum, and the cost of harvesting increased by about 25% for sorghum. The other thing that's important to consider when you're looking at the harvesting costs is to look at, so the 25% is on the base rate of harvesting costs, but there is also an element of yield. There's a high yield threshold that we collect, and then an additional rate on top of the base rate for yields that are over that threshold. Now, so it's important to look at because those relationships can change. For example, in sorghum, the high yield charge increased and the high yield threshold decreased. So that can be a hidden increase in there that may not be factored in. That relationship with the threshold decreasing and price, the additional high yield charge increasing, that held for all of the crops in 2024 except in soybeans.
And after grain harvesting, something important that also takes place, grain hauling. And what did you see for prices there?
So hauling also increased both in 2022 and 2024 relative to 2022. Again, sorghum was our leader in increases, about 33. Hauling prices increased by about 33% for sorghum, and about 25% for wheat, about 18% for soybeans, and around 9% for corn. Corn was the big increase in 2022, but was the lowest increase in 2024.
Sticking with the theme of prices going up a bit, also consistent when we look at haying.
Looking at the overall haying operation, the big jump was in 2022. It only increased, I say only, 10% is still a significant increase, but it didn't. In 2022, it increased by 23%, but in 2024, it only increased by about 10%. So not as much. Now, we did see silage, chopping, and hauling increase more this year than it did in 2022. And the cost of dozing land work jumped quite a bit in 2024, around 26%.
Did we see that high of jumps when it comes to tillage?
We saw probably across the board probably bigger jumps in 2022. We still saw increases in 2024. And again, there was kind of that trade-off. If it didn't jump up a lot in 2022, then it probably jumped more in 2024. For example, harrowing didn't go up as very much. It went up like about 12% in 2022, but it jumped up 38% in 2024. So really didn't see anything. We saw smaller increases in tillage, but except for that harrowing, that was a biggie.
Leah, why are you also taking the time to reference these numbers back to 2022?
So I keep referring to 2022 because when we were putting together the 2022 report, all of the input anecdotally that we were receiving was about, and if you looked out your window, the cost of fuel was just incredibly volatile. It was jumping up. Diesel was going crazy. Diesel prices were going crazy. And consequently, there was this feeling of, wow, how do I set my custom rates with this kind of fuel volatility? And we've seen that fuel volatility settle down some. It's not jumping up crazy like it was. It's rebounded a little bit. But we still have some other costs that are consistently increasing that are underlying those. And I think we see that in the tillage because of increasing numbers across the board over time. And that has to do with the cost of equipment. And cost of equipment has consistently been increasing. And you see that from ownership costs and depreciation expenses. And then you also see it in the cost to operate that equipment in your, again, fuel comes into play there. But then you also have the labor costs that are increasing, and you have the repairs and maintenance to that equipment have been going up. So the underlying equipment costs are driving a lot of these consistent increases. in your custom rates.
Leah, and wanting to touch on just a few more points from this report, what are you seeing for planting?
Consistent with the theme of everything else, it has been increasing. The biggest increase, again, that we saw this year was in both regular till and minimum till, was increase. The sorghum was the highest increases. For regular till, it increased from 2022, it increased by about 27%. And for minimum and no till, it increased by about 17% for sorghum. But you did see increases in the other crops as well.
What did you see for chemical applications? And reminding that this does not include the price of chemicals.
The biggest jumps there were in anhydrous, which is to be expected with higher fuel costs. And surprisingly, the jumps this year were under 20%. So I think we might have thought that would be larger, but because of the fact that it's application only and it's not related to the chemical, that's why that is a smaller number than what we might anticipate when we think about chemical application. Because of the fact that the chemical is not included, this is just the application. So those are all under 20% for ammonia and herbicides and insecticides.
And taking a quick step away from crops and wrapping up our conversation today, what do you see for hauling livestock?
We saw a big jump in 2022 of 18%. And this year it was only half that. It was 9%. And there you could see how the drop in fuel prices really had an impact on the end custom rate.
Leah, if people would like to read more on this report or go into more detail, where could they find it?
So I'm referring everyone to agmanager.info. There's a tab at the top of the homepage on agmanager.info for the custom rates, and that takes you directly to the report. That's the easiest way to find it. Kansas Department of Agriculture will also have a link on their homepage or on their page. But the easiest way to me is just agmanager.info.
Leah, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us information from the Kansas Custom Rate Survey of 2024.
Thank you so much for having me, Shelby. I appreciate you getting this information out to everybody.
That was Director of the Land Use Survey Office at K-State, Leah Tsoodle. I will link the Kansas Custom Rates in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back.
You're tuned into Agriculture Today. I'm Jacob Cloughton for Shelby Varner, and we end today's show with Brad White, Phillip Lancaster, Joe Gerken, and Bob Larson from Kansas State University.
Does the availability of water have any effect of the rate of gain on calves? And should we often have creep feeders or feeders that only the calves can access but not the cows? Should we do the same thing for water? So we have only water that only the calves can access. And Phillip, I'm going to start with you first relative to what are some of the basic water requirements we'd think of in livestock?
So just kind of some rules of thumb, thinking about the cow first. And it depends on, obviously, the environment that she's in. Depends on what type of feed she's eating. Cows that are eating dry hay are going to need to consume more water than cows that are eating fresh grass. But then cows that are in a hot environment are going to consume probably about twice as much water as cows that are in a cold environment in the wintertime. And so that in the wintertime, we estimate that's about 1 gallon for every 100 pounds of body weight. And in the summertime, that's about 2. And that tends to hold pretty well for calves as well. But one thing to think about for calves, especially young calves, is that they necessarily can't reach up to a full-size waterer like cows can. But calves still need water, all right? You think they're drinking milk, which is mostly water, but that water is bypassing the rumen. They still need water to go into the rumen so they can properly digest any forage that they're starting to consume. and get that rumen microbial population established. So we do need to make sure that they have access to water even at a very young age.
So, Bob, what about the rate of gain and the impact of water? Would that impact the rate of gain on calves?
Absolutely. In fact, water is, I think most nutritionists would say it's the most important nutrient, and we don't think about it a lot. And so and we see it not only in growth performance, but we see health issues too. Anytime that those animals are not as hydrated as they could be, their weight gain suffers, and they're more susceptible to a number of different diseases. Just the things we expect to see, pneumonia and those types of things, are much more likely in cattle that aren't fully hydrated. So water really is the most important nutrient, and we probably need to just give it a lot more attention than we typically think about. So plenty of access to water that cattle want to drink. And they're not as particular as humans. They don't need quite the quality that humans do, but they need clean water that they are not because of taste or any other impediments, high sulfur, those types of things that would make them not want to drink it. Those are things you need to understand about your water source, whether it's a well or surface water.
So, Joe, when you talk about having clean water, can I achieve Bob's clean water guidelines and promote intake in a pond situation, or do I have to have well water to get that done?
Yeah, good question. So water quantity is important, and water quality is also really important, like Bob just said. And you can do that in a pond. It's very hard to do in a pond where we're allowing livestock direct access into the pond, right? So if we're going to do that in a pond and maintain that water quality level to the heights that were just mentioned, it's important that you fence off the cattle like we've talked about, keep them out of the pond. We don't want to think about what the cattle are doing in that pond, or we wouldn't want to drink that water, and the cattle aren't going to want to drink as much water either. So keeping them out of the system is the biggest thing you can do to maintain that water quality in a pond setting.
You may have seen some data too, but I can remember from an extension publication that once showed that good clean water to nursing calves add about 30 pounds to weaning weight compared to them drinking out of a dirty stock tank or something like that. So, there's some economic benefit to investing in some good clean water source.
So the added weight gain, and that addresses the listener's question on the weight gain on calves. And when we think about the other part of the question, should you have limited access just for the calves? Kind of Joe brought that up in managed access can help keep clean water in a pond situation, whether that's for calves and cows.
That's all we have for now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.